So sit up straight and tall. So that one of the things that I want to like kind of just, there's nothing. Here's one of the things that demarcates you as, I think, a more serious student rather than a less serious student is that, or serious isn't the right word. I don't know, good student, is that a good student doesn't get bored with going over what he or she thinks they already know. Right? So if you make the assumption that at any moment in any yoga pose that there are things that you don't know or you haven't experienced, that's a good operating assumption, right? Like so it's like have a beginning mind. All those things are part of what a yoga student, a good yoga student, starts to be able to refine. And it does, in a lot of ways, need that kind of curiosity and wonder and patience with what you think you already know is part of what comes out of your own home practice, right? Because your home practice will get boring quickly if you don't do the same things over and over with wonder, right? One of the mistakes that people make, I think, when they're developing a home practice is they try to do all the extreme things that, or more poses or more difficult poses that are happening in a class, as if their class is supposed to be the way that their home practice actually is modeled after. That's an incredible mistake. Like that's a deep one, because your home practice needs to be more basic and more foundational. Sometimes you might do more complicated poses, but you're actually practicing the repetition that allows you to stay steady with what you already know when you're in a class that's doing things you're not used to, right? So the sensations that I've been doing a lot of thinking about this weekend have been the core 4 sensations that we emphasize in our method. And it's interesting because what we want to do is look for what's universal in asana in the MBS method, right? And we have a couple of strategies for that, because we want to look for what's universal, because we want to de-emphasize the physical performance of poses. Do that while still teaching rigorously. Right. So not like, if I de-emphasize, I don't mean, oh, whatever you do is fine and that's yoga, however you move. No, but we want to de-emphasize the particular actions in poses, right? This muscle, that muscle, because that discriminates against some of you as students, because you don't have access to it. Like if I make the whole class be about how you push down through your inner heel, that's really hard for me to do because I can't feel my inner heels like you can. Right. So, and as a strategy to de-emphasize the particular performance of poses, we try to adapt sensations. And there are sensations that come out of particular poses that we try to adapt. But we also offer, for those people that can't do even those, we offer a series of what we call core sensations that we think are happening in every pose that's done well, that are not dependent on one way of doing it, right? I know this is a lot what I'm saying right now, but I want you to start to appreciate and understand why we do the things we do. And the core sensations are grounding, expansion, balance, and rhythm. Now, those are such general sensations that they are happening in every pose, but often they're not noticed in every pose. Right. So like the sensation of grounding has many, many faces, right? Many, many different entry points and many different qualities of what the sensation of grounding means. Right. But we want to start helping you, and someone's got their camera on, so I heard them cough, right? So we're trying to show you what the general sensation is, facilitate that, so you can figure out how you should do that in relationship to whatever asana we're doing, right? So for example, exhaling, so pay more attention to your exhale as a precursor to centering. exhaling is a form of grounding, right? So it's like you don't think of it that way, but it's kind of like, and part of your grounding sensation should be the sensation of relief. Why would you want to start a pose in a state of stress? Right? So what it is that helps you create grounding, know that it's got many different sensations to it and many different access points. So, and then of course, I always kind of want you to soften your organs of perception, right? And typically I'm trying to have you do some of this more subtle stuff before you layer in asana, right? So before I tell you to press down through all that stuff, because I want you to realize that the pose is already occurring before your overt physical effort, right? So you're studying what the sensation of quieting is, not the goal of quieting your mind, right? So you're sitting here, and that's why I tell you to do things like feel the whole room, balance your head over your neck, open to what's behind you, in front of you. It's because I'm trying to get your mind to reduce the amount of judging it's doing and let there be the quiet in your mind-body relationship and in the room that is also part of the grounding sensation. It's going to be crucial to the sensation of balance. And it's also going to be really important to the sensation of expansion, right? And so now I'm going to start to cue your body. So hopefully you're watching your exhale, you're softening your organs of perception, but we're not here to go to sleep, right? So we're going to start activating asana. So feel your sitting bones, your feet on the floor, on the foot pedals. So there's a downward connection. Don't just like jump to that spot. Not only find where your feet are and your sitting bones are, and then reach to that spot through your spine, with your spine, not just with your judgment here, and start to lift your chest. We've just started the sensation of expansion, right? And we're doing it from quiet combined with structure, right? So the grounding coming from some more activated structure, because now your grounding is coming not just from surrender, but you're adding action and effort to your sensation of grounding. So now lift your chest, broaden across the shoulders, and then drop a silk curtain from the base of your neck to the sacrum. Well, think about that. Those are efforting instructions with this softening, surrendering sensation about the softness, this silk curtain from the base of the neck to the tailbone. And between effort and the surrender, I want you to balance. Now I want you to know that the activation and the quiet is part of what your focus is. That's another limb. How do you focus with your whole mind and body? Surely you don't just furrow your brow and think harder. Surely your focus means more than pushing against a wall. Surely you're more subtle than that. So if you can, bring your hands into prayer. So now if you can't, just feel the midline, the space between your sitting bones, right? Because this is just an outer reflection of the midline. So often I say for people that can do this, make this be an outer reflection of a space in the center of your chest. So your hands are an outer manifestation of the same point. That means that if you can't bring your hands together like this, then you can just do it from the center of your chest, right? So Michael, balance your head over your neck a little bit. Yeah, there you go. All right, so now you're adding symmetry. So this midpoint, this midline is connecting to where each of your feet are on the floor, on the foot pedals, where each of your sitting bones is, the space on each side of your head, right? You bring an alert stillness to your mid back, to right around your kidney region, a little bit lower. And you're being alert and assertive as you receive. Re-soften your jaw, the inside of your mouth, not to for alertness. Let it feed, that's dropping, feed up through the lift of your chest, up through your hands and down towards the earth. You're the weaving between the earth and the sky. You connect the two. The sky's touching the top of your head, bring it down. The earth's coming to reach it up through your spine to the sky. Yep. Let go of your day and prepare your mind to do yoga. When your mind starts to wane, repose, redo it. Find yourself in tangible space. Don't get lost in the intangible. Keeping the door open to what's intangible. You're both in a yoga pose. Good, and then release. Now reactivate. Take your sternum more actively up toward your chin down over your sternum, keeping the chest lifted enough so you don't collapse the front part of the neck, but you're lengthening the back side of the neck. As you do this, this should help you feel your sitting bones and potentially your feet. It's not how far you can drop your chin. The chin drop travels seamlessly through a current that's rising. Right? So there is a way to swim against a current without making a splash. There's a rising and a drop and a filling of the vessel in Jadahara Bandha, an alertness of the rib cage. Raise your head up with closed eyes. Open your eyes. So this lift in your chest, right? The connection between this movement and what's inside of you and what's outside of you, right? So remember, right now I'm moving from the center of the chest, I'm moving to the sensation of expanding, of expansion, right? So just when you drop, notice that you pulled away from what's outside of you when you drop your chest. As you start to lift your chest, let there be more of a connection to what's out, right? And it's especially going to come out the front side of the chest. Make sure you're rooting this, like imagine it's like light rays, right? Or sun rays. I don't mean to be too barfy, but there's something coming out this way. But the only way that happens is if it stays grounded between the shoulder blades, right? Or it's not the only way it happens, it gets maximized. So the lift in the chest and the grounding on the back side of the front side of the chest is actually part of what makes the sunbeams go out with more clarity, and then drop them again. Right? And then you start to see why we carry so much stress up here, right? Because we're constantly deadening here and the muscles aren't getting invigorated enough, right? So now you're gonna like do this again, lift the chest, connect to what's outside of you, anchor between the shoulder blades. And I hope as soon as you do that, you feel your sitting bones in your feet better. Because it turns out that the space between in the center of your sternum touches your whole body, right? That it actually can, this is why a lifted chest is in almost every pose. So you're trying to get really good at this. And then you drop. Notice that when you lift, you expand, but the expansion is predicated on a grounding on the backside, which then makes you feel your base and more connected to the earth. So these sensations are all integrated. All right, so lift your chest again. Ground. Now, why, we tell you to broaden across your collarbones, broaden across your back ribs. Get down with your sitting bones, lengthen your neck out through the top of your head, right? Filling the vessel, right? Letting the spine touch the outer edges. There's a big yawn from somebody, right? And now roll the inner upper thigh in and down and press down through your heels. Fill the whole vessel with an equal distribution of presence that comes from both surrender and from effort. Find a level of effort that doesn't cover up your subtlety. Be your own yoga student. Breathe. Good, and then release. One of the things that I see as mistakes, in my opinion, mistakes at least, in traditional students, and I think that this mistake ends up translating into how adaptive students are taught, right? So often if you watch like chair yoga classes online or something, they're often kind of taught with kind of a sing-songy voice and a little bit gentle. They're kind of like a gentle class, the way you might teach the elderly, right? And I get that, right? But I think that it's a mistake. That in fact, you have to be able to teach rigor through the emptiness, because that's what asana is. Don't forget, asana is going to be about disciplined rigor, right? That's one of its teaching mechanisms, right? So sit up straight and tall again. What I find in the middle of the effort is that traditional students often don't know that relief and emptiness is part of their base. It's part of their grounding, right? And then release. So remember, this is how Shavasana is going to be in every pose. Okay, so there's a part of your base that comes from pushing against stuff. So you put hands on the table or hands on the knees and all that. And then there's the part of your base that's emptier, right? And they're both grounding and they both need to be catalyzed into asana, right? So part of what I'm continually doing in the beginning of class is having you lift up, because I'm trying to get you to get space in your low back. One of the places that I know you compress space, and that space actually is part of your base. There's a lightness that's part of your base. The lightness internal sensation comes from a form of passive grounding, not active grounding, right? So you're moving around a little bit, trying to stretch out the cobwebs, but you're trying to get that sense, not just of movement, but that there's space. So I'm even like making rhythm on my sitting bones, right? Because I'm actually trying to quote, warm up, but I'm actually trying to get the empty part of my grounding activated, right? So my effort when I start moving my body isn't as violent. So some of the people on the call that are losing a physical ability, if you just reactivate your mind in order to try to overcome that change, it's going to lapse into some violence, right? So sit up straight and tall again. And I've been teaching a lot for months, like the separation between where your legs are and where your lower abdomen is. That must mean I think it's really important, right? Like more important than you can know. And it's even more important than I can, right? So I'm trying to make this part of my grounding sensation, right? And then I'm going to hit down with my sitting bones, lift my lower abdomen up, press down through my heels, balance my head over my neck, open the space even more actively in the center of my sternum. And I'm going to breathe and be alert. Because the limb movements are just the window dressing. In general, a general rule is that asana travels from the spine outward. And then when you get really good, you start to be able to receive from your limbs to your spine. Right? So then I'm puffing up and then I'm going to let it go. Then I'm going to take my legs wide. Again, I'm just trying to touch into more space for a second, right? And this being in more space, which is something that people with disabilities, their habits tend not to live in more space, they tend to live in less. This expansiveness and taking up more space is part of your base. It's part of the sensation of grounding, brought to you by expanding in more directions. So now one of the things I like to do to teach interoceptive awareness and movement is to focus on where the joints are, the center of the joints, right? So your legs are wide. Now bring them back together again to the midline. So whenever there's a change, a yogi is constantly asking questions of himself or herself, right? Whenever there's a change, you try to figure out how to capitalize on the change, right? So here, my legs are in a straight line. I'm going to do Tadasana. I'm going to push it on my finger bones because I know that feels good, right? To me, this is part of how I nourish, right? I let my femur bones be more rotated slightly in because I know this is energetically smart. And that's why Tadasana is in every pose, right? But I want to feel that and get my head lighter and get my neck lighter, right? But so now feel where your joints are, where your ankles, your knees, your hips, your shoulders, your elbows, your wrists. Then if you really want to mess yourself up, you can try to get the joints in the fingers and the joints in the toes, but I find that to be too much detail most of the time. So I'm actually trying to feel where my joints are in space. And then I want to bring a lightness into the joints. So those of you that have some struggles with physical muscular action, you're going to need to invigorate the empty space in your joints more. So they start to not just be acted upon, but become part of movement. Good, and then release. And so now I'm going to take my legs wide again. And I'm going to notice the change in how my body is, the change in gravity, but I'm going to go back to my joints. I'm going to go back to my ankles, my knees, my hips, my shoulders, my elbows, my wrists. I like to say the head's a joint. So in order to find the empty space, I have to go here. So I'm trying to feel myself in space. And once I do that, right, find where my inner joints are, then I want you to try to feel and open to the sensation on your skin, because that's everywhere in the room, right? So you've got this interoceptive, like, where are my joints? And then you take that as a base and you try to open your skin to more of the room. And you breathe. I don't mean imagine your skin open. I mean open your skin. What would that even mean? Do it anyway. Good, and then release. I can tell you, as soon as my chest drops, my skin doesn't feel as open, right? So then bring your legs back together. So downward facing dog, so you either do it like this, do it on a table, right? So once I change gravity, my inward awareness changes. How do I ground it so the expansion gets even more, right? So I'm going to ground my sitting bones, lift my lower abdomen up as I hit my sitting bones down, connect that out through my arms, right? Open my palms. And as soon as I start to open my palms, I'm going to connect that opening to the sensation on the balls of on the soles of my feet. I'm going to start making connections. Remember, we're trying to get the brain to receive more from the body. We're using asana to create more, to allow for more input that makes it to my brain, to my mind, from my brain to my mind. So I'm taking a few breaths here. I'm grounding so how can I increase grounding here? So I'm in this position Remember, grounding's infinite, and some of it's revealed by effort. So hit your sitting bones down even more. Lift your sternum even more. Work the underside of your arms even more. Some of the base is revealed by effort, right? Some of it has to be received. The trick is, can you effort and receive? Well, your breath can help. Your breath literally is making, through the vascular system, your body receive, right? And through other systems, and then release. So now I've got that space in my low back again, right? So I'm making sure I don't lose that. So when I'm trying to create the efforting in a way that's just muscular, come back forward and down facing dog again. So now, because I know what I'm about to do is going to be pretty earthy, it's going to take a lot of like effort in smaller spaces, right? So I'm going to look down a little bit. Where you put your eyes is actually really helpful, right? In poses, right? So I'm activating my arms. As soon as I activate my arms, I find my sitting bones, I find my feet, right? So, but now as I hit down through my sitting bones, I'm going to do something strange. I'm going to ask to activate through my sitting bones all the way down. Look at the angle of your spine. Follow that angle and push your sitting bones into the floor, right? And lift your sternum to do it. And now open your hands, the skin on your hands. And now ground your feet. Go beyond the top of your head. Activate towards the bones and breathe. Good, and then release. Now, thumbs up if that was a hard pose. That was hard, correct? Yeah. Asana still needs to be rigorous sometimes, right? It needs to be rigorous. That's how it is for everybody. I'm making no exceptions for myself because I'm disabled. Right? I want to work. Okay, so now I'm going to go way over. And then back again. And I know in a second, because I'm going teaching, that I'm going to take my arms wide soon. Right? So it's like, I want to fill the space. So now joint awareness is interesting if I add that layer to my pose, right? So I'm sitting with my legs together. I'm going to find Tadasana. So for me to find it right away, I push my own femur bones in. But you can probably do that yourself. But I push on the bone because I know the bones are critical in Tadasana, right? As opposed to muscular action. So those of you that can bring your knees together, maybe do it just with your muscles, but you need your bones to receive Tadasana, right? So it's like, whoa, what does that even mean? Well, I don't know, figure it out. This is why you practice, right? Okay, so now from here, I'm going to take my arms wide, but I'm going to practice where my ankles, knees, hips, shoulders, elbows, wrists are. Oh, dang it. There's a disconnect because of my lower abdomen is paralyzed, right? My abdomen is paralyzed between where my empty spaces in my arms are and where my ankles, knees, hips are, right? So what place do I need to activate to make sure the union between the two is there, and then come on back. So for me, and most of you that aren't paralyzed in your abdomen, this won't be as an extreme as it is for me. If I'm trying to connect my arms and my legs are in a straight line, like they're more in Tadasana, I have to seriously activate the hinge point between where my femur bones come into my pelvis. Okay, and I need that activation to feed my chest and my feet. And once it feeds my chest, then it can feed my arms. Okay, how you activate that hinge point. Now remember, I tried to make space between, lift up again, right? I want you to get space between your legs and your spine, right? Because the activation I'm talking about can't come from pushing against something. right? It has to be deeper than that. Okay, so now I'm sitting in Tadasana again. I'm feeling my ankles, my knees, my hips, my shoulders, my elbows, my wrists. Now, as soon as I mess with my balance by taking my arms wide, so those of you that don't think you mess with your balance when you take your arms wide, it's mostly likely because you're overdoing your low back, right? So now I'm going to feel where my joints are and take my arms wide. And because I can tell where my pose gets darker or smudges, right? For me, it's right in the junction between my finger bones and my spine. Activate there, right? So if you can't hold your arms up, don't worry about it. Just go out from your shoulders, right? But activate Tadasana. Roll the finger bones in and down and stretch out through your heels to create a rise in the lower abdomen to feed the empty spaces of the joints. Good. And then don't do that and collapse and watch how too much weight comes back into your joints as you collapse the pose. So especially as we age, we move our joints from here, from this collapsed position, and we're wearing out joints, and there being more hip and knee replacements and shoulder replacements, right? Because we're naturally falling into our joints. So the synchronous movement of joints and awareness of joints is profoundly activating. You just don't get to squeeze it, right? You have to activate it. So again, find your knees, your ankles, your knees, your hips, your shoulders, elbows, wrists. So I'm remembering, right? I'm gonna pin my own hips to get this to lift, right? And I'm bounce head on my neck. I'm gonna find my feet. I'm gonna find where my joints are. And I'm gonna keep the joints in my arms connected to the joints in my legs as I inhale and take my arms wide. And so if you're here, I don't care. If you're here, I don't care. Just broaden here, right? And now I'm trying to activate, keeping the back of my eyes aware to the insides of my joints. The back of my eyes to the inside of my joints. Soften your jaw. Breathe. Engage and make length from the side hip to the side armpit. As you do that, find the action in your legs through the emptiness of your joints. Good, and then release. That's a form of expansion, right? So the problem with that expansion, because it's less dramatic, it's kind of a more weighted expansion, right? So now take your legs wide. Remember, this whole class is kind of exploring the relationship between a couple of core sensations. So I'm actually like lifting up my spine a little bit, because remember, I want that space in my back, between my space, my legs and my back, to be part of my pose. So I'm like touching it. I'm moving my body a little bit. I'm popping forward and back, going, oh yeah, there it is. I want that space. Then I'm going to ground that space. I'm going to push down on my own legs as they're spread and practice lifting out of that space. But now don't tip over. I got to be careful here. But now I want to do it behind. I was forward in front of the balance point. That covers the crease. I want to do it from behind the balance point. Ground my legs. Lift the lower abdomen up. Broaden between the shoulder blades. Make my head come into balance with my spine. And breathe into that internal connection of space. Not of effort. You're efforting to get there a little bit, but mostly you're marking the sensation of space. Keep that long and lean forward on the front edge of your sitting bones. So now use the undulation of your inhalation into your rib cage to keep touching the space and the crease of your hips. Use that more activation of the crease in your hips to invigorate the empty spaces in your joints. Your ankles, your knees, your hips, your shoulders, your elbows, your wrists. Now I'm going to come into the midline, inhale, and take my arms wide. God damn if you're not lighter in this pose and you've missed what I was just doing. Lightness as part of your base. Effort that follows lightness doesn't squeeze it together. The inside of the outside of effort. Good, and then release. Bring your legs back into Tadasana. So that whole sequence was actually for that one pose, right? So I'm wanting to keep it active in my awareness, so I'm using rhythm. I'm rocking, trying to show you different ways to practice, right? Different ways to create through lines in your own practice. Oh, here's a crazy, I'm liking this feeling, right? I'm rocking back and forth and I'm making sure one arm, however it moves, whether it's one shoulder, is in rhythm, right? I'm gonna do it the other way. So I'm adding rhythm in here, right? Because one of the things when you try to activate the inside of joints, it tends to get dry and you lose rhythm, right? So now I'm gonna do it to the first side again, right? But now I wanna keep in my ankles, my knees, my hips, my shoulders, my elbows, right? Blah, blah, blah. So like I'm actually moving all of my joints and paying attention to a rhythm between my joints, right? And then going back again. So, oh, then I'm gonna add, I'm pulling on one leg and pushing on the other. Which one is it? Figure it out, right? It's for your freaking pose, right? Oh, I want more awareness on my back body as my chest lifts, as I come into rhythm. Yeah, that'd be yoga. Yep, absolutely. Remember, we're trying to tell you that the 4 sensations matter more than the particular actions. You and I are limited in the domain of actions. We're not limited in the realization of asana, right? We're just limited in actions. It's different, right? Take the legs apart again. So because traditional students, I think I would call them greedy, or insatiable, or not willing to do the heart of the work of asana. And it's not their fault. They don't really know where the heart of yoga is. They only know where the outer body is, right? So one of the ways that a traditional yoga practice is going to teach this stuff without it being so direct is by increasing base variation and arm and leg movements, right? Instead of making, like we went through a whole series trying to make the inside emptiness of it come into your pose, trying to reveal to you the empty part of your grounding sensation, right? But what happens, you can make it more dramatic, and that's why there's like so many standing poses. If you change gravity and positions of the spine, you get to learn it with a little more flair, right? So these kind of become more fun in some ways because I get to do more. I don't have to sit with the truth of the realization. I get to have movement be the teacher. But the thing is, not everyone can do this very well. That's why I teach it the other way first, right? And by the way, I think the way we came into this is better than starting here. But now as I'm changing gravity, I'm getting used, my brain's getting used to that, my mind's getting used to that part of it. I want to do this and pause and find where the inside of my joints are. Where are my ankles, my knees, my shoulders, my elbows, my hips? My hips, shoulders, elbows, wrists. And once I locate them all, I'm going to breathe. Remember, even when you're moving, well, I'll say this after we'll do the other side. So now I'm doing it again. So I'm getting over here, changing grounding, changing base, getting variation from my mind that gets bored fast, right? And then I'm feeling now, once I'm over here, I want to find my joints, my ankles, my knees, my hips, my shoulders, my elbows, my wrists. Breathe. Find where you're pinching your own pose. I was by dropping my chin. Find where you're pinching your own pose. Good, and then release. So often we pinch the quiet grounding part of every asana because we're too attached to the outer movement. So I'm staying in center here because I want to take in what I've just been doing. So by being in the Sen midline, I'm trying to take in the quiet part of my grounding. I'm going to do the other side now. I don't want it just to be about effort. I want to receive. All right, so I've just recentered. I'm going to go off-centered, make off-centered be a teacher. Right? I'm going to find my joints right away. And remember, I often tell you that. Find how to activate your spine. So the twist of the spine or the belly up towards the ceiling is an effort to, so here's me dropped. I can't feel my legs as well. Here's me open. I can feel my legs better. Then I can take the next movement and feel the empty points of each of my joints. My ankles, so my ankles on the one I'm leaning more, inside of it feels different than the back one, right? Okay, find what's the same though, right? So then find that where the knees are, where the hips are, where the shoulders are, and then connect them by activating your spine. And the yogas are going to tell you, don't just lengthen your spine, rotate it a little bit. And once you see that, then you can understand why the sun goes up. If you can do it, doesn't matter if you can't do it. All these sensations, this was never what was important. Never. That's not, and then come on back. It's not foundational. So I can now, I'm gonna want to do the other side because otherwise I'm gonna be off balance on the inside. I'm gonna lean over. I'm gonna activate. I'm gonna find where my joints are in the midst of the activation. I'm gonna get that my belly, the state of my spine, needs to not go this way, right? It needs to go this way. Here's the suspenders, right? But the suspenders are on both sides, right? And then once I get this and find where my joints are, I add the window dressing and I breathe. I get to enter more of the world, especially if I open to the skin of my hand. Good, and then come on back to center. Be in the center. I'm gonna bring my legs together because they've been wide for a while. Ooh, booyah. Right, I'm gonna all of a sudden go back to Tadasana and roll my finger bones in and go, oh yeah, there's the midline. And I abandon the midline when I effort too much. So it's a never ending process, right? What's hard about finding, and then legs apart again, what's hard about finding like really opening to like the inside of your joints, or you have to go to the part of the pose that isn't changing. in order to truly access empty space, your mind has access to that stuff. That's why your mind can make you hold your breath. Your mind has access to what's unchanging. It just doesn't know how to make it nourishing. It's scared by it. So I'm sitting here and I'm kind of doing Shavasana, but mostly I'm trying to find the steady inward part of the pose, which I know if my mind is the only one that's aware of it, I'll have a tendency to hold my breath. So as you connect to what's unchanging, which is what's unchanging in your joints too, if you stay breathing, that empty space starts to become animated. Because even while you're moving, the unchanging part is embedded into the moving. They're actually not in conflict. So when you start to realize the lighter part of your base, of your grounding, it's getting its root is in what's unchanging. And your body makes it lighter, not your mind. So now I'm taking all this weird awareness and I'm changing my basic. I'm going over. Lengthening the string of my spine into the empty space in the room. And I'm letting it go down to the floor through my chair seat, beyond the top of my head. I'm turning it so it gets straighter. I'm letting my breath start in the unchanging and then come into the changing, which is my body. I'm making it a celebration by moving more of my body from empty spaces in the joints, your ankles, knees, hips, shoulders, elbows, wrists. I'm now going to connect it to the skin on my palm, on my arm. It's going to make me lighter by doing that. Good, and then release. I'm being a center. I did that side incredibly well and incredibly deeply. So I'm going to have to pause here. It's the type of thing I want you to notice in your own practice. When you hit something, like you hit a good golf shot, right? You got to honor how deep you just went. So now I'm going the other way again. And I'm knowing that there's the unchanging part doesn't have to be heavy. It also doesn't have to be dark. It will appear that way to the mind. Part of why we can't find the peace train. Making sure I make it to the celebration of my skin. From emptiness to bones to skin. I touch all the space in the room and it touches me. And I breathe. Legs together. So this line popped into my head when I said, I feel the empty space with my skin and I let the space touch me, right? So I'm coming back to midline and I'm making sure I feel Tadasana before we do Shavasana, right? I'm thinking about a line that was so clever. There's a documentary about Ram Dass that I'm just grounding here, so I hope you're centering, right? I'm just wasting time as you center for Shavasana, right? Um, and it's made of Ram Dass after he had a stroke. He had a really bad stroke, and he was aphasic and couldn't talk as well. But they still made a documentary, and he talks about that he didn't have a stroke, that rather he was stroked, right? Like it stroked him, and it wasn't just a loss, right? So the idea that you want to like will your poses into the world, but also let the world and the empty space touch you, you gotta let it go both directions. Otherwise, the empty space in your joints will be heavy. The unchanging won't be accessible. So as I'm sitting here practicing symmetry, I'm trying to set the conditions to let the unchanging feel supported by my chair, by releasing my weight. So now we're heading towards Shavasana. For some reason today, I want to do it with my palms down. I'm not sure why, but I'm going to honor what I feel, just like I want you to honor what you think is the best position for your Shavasana today. So of course, the organs of perception need to soften. And remember, the empty space isn't just darkness, it's also light. It's buoyant. I'm trying to let that be true in Shavasana as I'm supported by my chair or the table. There's a home here. Feel your breath. Just observe it. Stay connected to what's unchanging in your breath, even though it's moving. Your breath touches something, goes towards it and it recedes. Goes towards it and recedes on inhalation, and it goes towards it and recedes on exhalation. Both. Start to bring yourself back, slightly deeper inhalation, slightly longer exhalation. When you're ready, open your eyes slowly. It's too bright, close them again. And then open. So it's funny about realizing the unchanging part of an asana as also being hopeful in your base. Okay, so like there's an energy of lightness that comes from what's unchanging, right? The mind, though, tends to think of what's unchanging as an ending or as a singularity with no space in it, right? And I think that's because mind has its source, because the emptiness is what's unchanging, right? And the mind has its source in that. So it sees the unchanging as an ending, when in fact, it wasn't. That even in what's unchanging, there's space. And you're studying that in asana. You're realizing you have all these different movements happening and all these things are happening. And what's the same is the same. And awareness of the joints is one of the ways where you're forced to connect to this part that's more grounded in one, the unchanging, even though everything we have pivots around the joints, right? Everything we can control pivots around the unchanging part, right? All right, weird stuff, but what the hell? Hands together. Namaste. The spirit in me bows to the spirit in you.